Let's talk about price, right? So starting with chapter 5, the real and nominal price of commodities. So the real price is the price in labor, the amount of labor, and the nominal price is the price in money. Some key points. Labor is the real measure of exchangeable value of all commodities. The reason will be explained later. But because the value is commonly, but labor is hard to measure, right? So that's why value is commonly estimated in money. So, why is labor the real price, right? So let's think about it. The far greater part of one's needs must derive from the labor of other people, right? Because we now have the division of labor. You have to exchange. You have to exchange the fruit of your own labor with the fruit of other people's labor, right? And the person is rich or poor according to the quantity of the labor which he can command. What everything really worth to a man who has acquired it, you can think it this way, is the toil and trouble which the commodity can save to this person himself, right? And which this commodity, if sold, can impose upon other people, right? But then it's difficult to measure labor, right? Because even if the time spent in working on something, on two different things, is the same, the hardship endured on working these two things might be very different, and the ingenuity, right, or let's say the talent required for these two kinds of work may be very different too. So it's hard to measure. That's why, well, it makes more sense to commonly estimate the price in money, right? That's what we accustomed to do. And there's just one note on the diminishing value of money. And also shows why it's when you are analyzing the real price with something really worth, right? You cannot just only look at the money value, money price at that time. So in the 16th century, the discovery of the mines of America, the silver and gold mine, has reduced value of gold silver to about 1/3 what it had been before. And in addition to that, right, the amount of gold and silver in coins is also reducing, right? Combine that with the value of gold, silver going down, the real price, the real value of this money, or let's put it differently, the amount of subsistence, the amount of necessary food that this money can acquire has reduced a lot. So, for example, the English rent, right? That's another interesting note as well, right? So, in England, the rent, for a time, contained a portion of it is was paid in food, paid in what Adam Smith called corn, but corn really means grain in general. I think maybe especially mean wheat, not too sure. So English rent reserved in money has fallen to a fourth of its value since 1860, no, 1586, right? What it means is the amount of food, the amount of corn that these rents could afford has fallen to 1/4 since that time. The value of grain, right, is more stable than the value in the currency in a certain amount of a certain denomination of currency, currency. But it's liable to more, uh, larger annual variations, right? the price or the value of grain varies a lot year by year, depending on if the seasons are good or not, right? But throughout centuries, it's a bit more stable, right? On the other hand, the value of gold and silver coins, at least from Smith's time and forward, were pretty stable from year to year, but from century to century, right, it will see very large change. Okay, the standard metal. In every nation, only one metal is being used as the standard metal, right? So, and it's usually the first metal used in commerce as money. So for the Romans, they first used copper as money, and in fact, they had only copper money until 5 years before the First Punic War, which broke out in 264 BC. And only until 5 years before the First Punic War, they started using silver as money. And for the modern European nations, silver is often used as the standard money. But then, as we know, later on they used gold standard. But looks like in Smith's time, silver is for very commonly used as the standard metal. So the English, right? They initially used only silver money, and there was little gold until the time of Edward III, who ruled in the 1300s, and nor any copper until the time of James I, who ruled England and Scotland after the death of Queen Elizabeth. So this guy ruled in the 1600s, yes. All right. Yes, so the standard money originally was the only legal tender, right? The only money that you can use to settle debts and take legal effect, I guess. But later, the proportion between the values of the different metals, right? Between the standard metal and the other metal were declared by law. And this distinction between standard versus non-standard metal become less important. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter. The component parts of the price of commodities. So what are the parts of the price of commodities? 3 parts: wage, profit, and rent. Simple enough. So wage and profit, right? Wage, easily understood. Originally, the quantity of labor is the only rule of value, right? And then the laborer enjoy the fruit of their labor. They don't need to pay profit to their boss or rent to the landlord. But with the accumulation of stock in the hands of some particular people, right, which such stock can then be used to put people to work, and something must be given to compensate the undertaker, right, the person who put people to work, and this is profit. And profits are not just wages of inspection and direction. You can think of an example, right? Say 2 businessmen, right? They are, for example, working in the same trade, which has a regular profit. Let's just make up a number, 10%. 10% of their revenue would be pure profit, clean profit. And then let's say one employs far more stock, far more people, earns far more revenue, let's say 10 times revenue than the other one. Then he earns 10 times the profit, right? Does that necessarily mean he puts in 10 times more work? No, right? So it's clear that it's not just because you put in more work, you get more profit. Um, it's regulated by the the regular rate of the profits in a certain trade, and also depending on the size of your business, right? And rent. Okay, so as we talk about the accumulation of stock has given occasion to profit, and um, the appropriation of land, right? When land has become private property, now rent constitute a third part of the price of most commodities. Um, and Smith commented that rent is a smaller portion in highly manufactured commodities because there are more profits in those. Okay, what he meant by this? Um, from my understanding, this is what he meant. Let's take, for example, uh, let's say sheep, right? Or goat or whatever. Yeah, let's just say sheep, right? If you eat, let's say the meat, right? Lamb. To produce the meat, who takes the profit? The profit of the person who pasture the sheeps, right? The farmer. Only that profit need to be taken out. And then the rest is wage of the laborer, right? And also rent for the landlord. Side note, maybe the farmer and the landlord are the same person. But let's consider making clothes, right? Making clothing out of sheep wool. Now you need to consider not just the profit of the farmer, right? But also the profit of the uh, master spinner, master weaver, right? Uh, these guys who have like spinning shop and weaving shop, whatever. Their profits need to be considered too, right? And perhaps the profits of the dyeing factory, right? So on and so forth. All these profits need to be considered, right? And all these different, I guess, different wages too of the different laborers. And that, I guess, leaves less room for the rent of the landlord. I think this is his logic. Uh, okay, now moving on to chapter 7. Uh, the natural and the market price of commodities. Okay, what does he mean by that? Key points. This chapter is where the concept of equilibrium first mentioned in the book. Market price is regulated by the quantity brought to the market and the effectual demand, right? He didn't just mention demand, but effectual demand of those who are willing to pay the natural price, right? A beggar can demand a bunch of things, but his demand doesn't really matter because he cannot afford these. Natural price is the central price to which all actual prices gravitate. All right, now let's elaborate. Why would the market price deviate from the natural price? So industry suits itself to the effectual demand. So what he means by industry is, I guess, the productive power of labor, right? But the quantity produced by a given amount of industry, the given amount of laborer, machines, etc., sometimes fluctuates, right? Especially in husbandry, right? In agriculture, say you put in the same amount of work, but the weather is just not nice, right? You get some natural disaster and stuff, you fucked, right? Then you cannot always suit your the quantity with the quantity supplied cannot always meet the quantity demanded. And this sudden change of demand can fluctuate prices a lot. Adam Smith gave an example of public mourning when the monarch dies. And he also mentioned that these prices fall chiefly on wages and profits because rent are sometimes fixed either in money or in proportion of the total produce. Okay, so here's a case study on the short-term fluctuation of price due to sudden change in demand or supply. So public mourning in the UK used to last a year, right? So and then until George II changed it to 6 months. So in that time, people were required to wear black for an entire freaking year after a monarch dies, right? And what happens? Well, that will raise the profit of merchants who possess black cloth, but does not raise the wage of weavers. Okay, why is that? He explained the demand here is for the work done, right? The demand here is for black cloth that's ready to be made into clothing. That's what the immediate demand is. And that's why the wage of the tailor would rise, right? Because the demand here is the work to be done, right? We need tailors to quickly make clothing out of these black cloth, right? So there's immediate demand to turn black cloth into clothing, giving rise to the wage of tailor. And the demand for weave and produce black cloth, I guess only will rise after current stock of black cloth has been nearly depleted. So that's why currently there's no demand for work to be done with regard to black cloth. And that's my understanding of this case study, why the wage of weavers does not go up, but the wage of tailor goes up. And let's talk about long-term deviation from the natural price, right, or the equilibrium price. Several things. One is the lack of general knowledge of high profits in certain trades. But he mentioned that this is seldom kept long. Or secrets in manufacturers. That can be kept on more easily. And I guess it's because it will require more skill to actually put this knowledge into practice, and also need like resources, right? Maybe certain machines, certain devices, some means of production that cannot be easily acquired. So these can be kept on more easily. I suppose that's the reason. Scarcity of particular soil. What he means by that is maybe some land are just very suitable for certain produce, right? Maybe some particular flavor of wine or so on. And these high prices can be kept for forever. And he also mentioned that in Indostan, I think Indostan means modern day India and ancient Egypt, where every man is bound by a principle of religion to follow the occupation of their father. The wages and profits can be lower than natural rate for generations. Okay, I think with respect to India, he's talking about the caste system, where different castes of people can only perform certain occupations. And as we know, the lower castes were living still living pretty miserable conditions, I think. As for ancient Egypt, he probably made a mistake. I did a bit of digging and looks like yes, it is customary in ancient Egypt to follow one's father's occupation, but you don't have to, right? You can still do something different from what your father does. Okay, so that concludes the presentation on chapter 5, 6, and 7.